Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this week's edition of the Midweek Wire. I'm Patrick Henningsen, your host. We have a crisis brewing in the international system. It's a long time coming. This isn't something that's just happened overnight. And it's the breakdown of the international legal framework. Okay, this has been going on for many decades, but we've reached a real crisis point, even in the last few months, where you can see there's just a visible dysfunction and an inability for countries to come together to fulfill their obligations under the UN Charter, under multiple treaties, to seek peaceful resolutions first before going to war. I can't underline how important this is right across the board, leading the way in the disintegration, dismantling of the international system. We're talking about the post-World War II international legal framework, international law, plus the institutions under the UN umbrella, plus innumerable treaties and agreements that were signed and ratified by member states individually. Leading the way in this dismantling process is the United States of America, followed by its partner, Great Britain, and the State of Israel. Those will be the three leading countries that are actively dismantling the international system as we speak. Now, I want to bring on to the program somebody who's going to help us understand this problem. Is also somebody who's published a very provocative and important piece at 21stcenturywire.com, which we'll bring up on screen just now. And this is, are we witnessing the end to international law? That's the question. And this is what the author here, Arnaud Develay, has posed in his piece. That's up at 21stcenturywire.com. And we will bring that on screen shortly. We'll also bring Arnaud up as well very shortly to talk about this and the fact that we have a major international crisis brewing. We'll bring him up. He's an international human rights lawyer. He's a political consultant. He's also an author, and he is joining us right now on the live link. His name is Arnaud Develay. Arnaud, thank you for joining us on the Midweek Wire.
Hello, Patrick. Thanks for having me.
So the article up at 21st Century Wire, we'll bring that up on screen again, Arnaud, and this is something that you've just authored. Now, we're really just giving a brief introduction here to this issue, but it's something a lot of people, Arnaud, are familiar with. Again, go to 21stcenturywire.com. I've also posted this article on my X feed. If you're watching us live on X, you'll see this article just below the live stream. And you're really outlining here, Arnaud, a series of events that are sending a very disturbing signal, First of all, just if you want to, give us a summary of what you've written here and what the important points are that people need to understand. Go ahead, Arnaud.
Yes, thank you, Patrick. Well, just to be sure, this was kind of long in coming. It's not something that happened overnight, and I thought that it would be interesting. And in a way, it was almost a synchronicity because the president of Brazil, who happened to have just ended hosting the BRICS 2025 forum, made a statement about it yesterday. And I swear I'm not his speechwriter, to the effect that international law, I quote, is a dead letter. So coming from one of the big five in the BRICS, someone who has a certain political gravitas, who's been around in the international arena for at least 20 years now, who's a somewhat of a inspirational figure in many quarters, for him to actually use this platform to make a pronouncement to that effect that we are somewhat facing, if not a dead end, at least a fork in the road. I found it significant, and again, it was somewhat almost serendipity or synchronicity, whatever you want to call it, that he would say that, 24, 48 hours after I just penned the article. But this is pretty much what has been germinating, in a lot of international observers and experts alike in the last, I would say, the last 25 years. If we were to really somewhat try to juxtapose the phenomena, one might be tempted to look at the advent of the unipolar moment. Others might look at the post 9/11 period. You know, Suffice it to say that international law, as such, is a rapport of force. It's a balancing of power. It is not somewhat of a within the municipal law framework, a sovereign nation state who has the monopoly of enforcing its own laws. It is a set of practices. Some of them have crystallized into treaties and explicit norms, which can only work if everybody knows that not enforcing them would put them somewhat at odds with the rest of the international community. That's the principle of opinio juris. Everyone understands what the norms are and where the contours, the forbidden line laid. And the other one is the idea that when you enter into an agreement, whatever this agreement may be like, you are expected to do so in good faith, and that includes the negotiating process leading up to the signature of the document and its subsequent ratification. And what we're seeing now is that what has been built pretty much in the wake of World War II, not only in thus far as the UN mechanism within the structure itself, which remind our listener, was itself a kind of an updated version of a prior system, which was called the League of Nations, which a lot of people, tend to blame for the leading up to World War II. League of Nations, which let's recall had been proposed by not George, Woodrow Wilson in its 14 points. But that unfortunately was never ratified by the United States, owing to a Republican dominated Senate, which at the time decided that this might amount to subsidizing US sovereignty to, there was already this debate, I guess, in US politics that the UN was this kind of, or the League of Nations, as it were, was this kind of unrepresentative body, and that the US wanted to preserve its own prerogative. But suffice it to say, not having the US within the League of Nations was probably a big factor in the demonetization of the institution merely 20 years after it was first founded. So it was decided in 1945 in San Francisco that, for the sake of enduring peace after the horror of World War II, the US would, of course, be one of the charter member, but not only, also the Soviet Union, so that the foundations, in as far as representativity and legitimacy were concerned, would be such that the UN system could be considered something that, somewhat could be used to mediate dispute. Now, to be sure, as early as 1946, some would say 48, and Churchill's famous speech, we transited into what came to be known as the Cold War. And so the Cold War period was characterized by a lot of veto at the Security Council on both sides, depending on the issues. But at least there was, a sense that the UN could be a force for good. And some would say that the UN is has always been a useless organization. I would argue the opposite, despite the bad rap the organization is getting. Some of its own general secretaries, especially early on in the game, and going far only, going back only in as far as 20 years ago, did these, represented the institution pretty good. But then, unfortunately, we started witnessing a phenomena, especially following the 2003 war on Iraq, where the UN itself, which had really stood firm on its core principle in the charter, which, and we can discuss this interpretation, because it's something has happened in the 1980s, 1990s, which somewhat attempted to eviscerate what had been the twin fundamental pillar of the UN Charter, which is respect for national sovereignty and an insistence on resolving international dispute through peaceful means. So this started changing in the 1980s, 90s, with what came to be known as the humanitarian intervention doctrine. Some would say, no, it always existed under Chapter 7, R2P, and all that. But suffice it to say, R2P was never really quite developed as a doctrine in practice. And so a lot of powerful UN member states, stuck by default to the old position, which is basically that what goes on within national affairs of any given country is for that country to administer. The UN should only be concerned, and this is what's, it's in its preamble, for the pursuit of the maintaining of peace, essentially. But again, 2003 is really a turning point in that sense, because after we saw the US being essentially shamed by the UN body, trying to get that additional extra resolution, bearing on the lack of clear language within Resolution 1441 as relates to the use of force against Iraq. The US decided to basically assemble its own policy and engage in frontier justice, as it were. And so, that was a big blow, but to the international legal system, to be sure, because again, international law as a concept can only be respected when some of its most powerful proponents abide by it. And to the extent we had this kind of departure from all acceptable norms, i.e., what Robert Jackson used to call the scenes that contains all the other scenes, which is the crime of aggression, crimes
Mm.
against peace, as specifically referred in the 1928 Kellogg-Briand Pact, which then found its way into the Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the UN Charter. This was really like a Rubicon moment, and somewhat we never really quite recovered for it, but the US elites never really forgot that slight, this slap in the face at the UN, and they realized that it was important to try to influence who was going to be running certain agencies associated with the UN, so that in future war of choice, it would be easier to somewhat dress up whatever decision was to be made with a veneer of legality. And this is where we started seeing UN associated organs like the OPCW and the IAEA,
Mm.
and it's not necessarily a UN monitoring body, but somewhat was added to it in the 1990s, the OSCE. And those organs increasingly became politicized, unfortunately, with the result that the OPCW, for instance, was at the heart of a major controversy going back to the Syrian crisis. We all recall the red line, Obama's famous red lines, bearing on the use of the alleged use of chemical weapons by the then called Assad regime, which almost got us into World War III, literally in the waning days of August 2013. And that is until, somehow, I guess, owing to the Russian fleet standing, between the Western fleets and the Syrian coastline, some of the most notable Western figures, starting with Obama himself, who actually conveniently hid himself behind congressional mandate to declare war, which probably must have been one of the few times that a U.S. president would actually consult or pretend to care about what Congress would think about
Well,
it.
on that point, Arnaud, it was very close. So you're talking about 2013 August, right? So
Yes, late August.
after the alleged chemical weapons attack in Damascus, as Carle de Ponte and the UN team are rolling up, as if by magic, sarin munitions are launched in East Ghouta, and
That's right.
so the British voted on that. That was one of the last times they put a vote to the House of Commons for war. David
I was
Cameron
gonna
was
say
prime minister,
yes.
and they lost by the smallest. If the British had passed, the U.S. would have gone in behind them as usual, right? So it's funny how history works out sometimes, just on very thin margin. But sadly, Arnaud, it delayed the collapse of Syria, but eventually they got what they wanted just this past December, after 15 years of sanctions and trying to strangle that country. But I think this is an important point that you brought up, was the manipulation and the using the OPCW and the International Atomic Energy Agency. Most recently, the International Atomic Energy Agency providing intelligence to the Israelis. That's the implication about Iran's nuclear scientists, targeting and things like that. I mean, this is serious. So I think you're looking at a total breakdown, at least because of the abuse, because of the cynical abuse, I would say, using UN bodies, penetrating them, infiltrating them, like the OPCW and others, and then weaponizing them in order to build a case for war, when these are organizations that were founded to help prevent war. They're being used as instruments by the Western powers. I'm talking mainly about the U.S., Britain, and Israel. I think we'll just talk about that tripartite there. But you've also mentioned in your article here, Arnaud, and pardon me if we're moving along here, just because this will be a shorter program than normal. But you say, finally, the diplomatic processes such as the Minsk Accords, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, that's the Iran nuclear deal, codified in UN Resolutions 2202 and 2231, were devised as schemes to respectively allow Ukraine and its to build up its armed forces in anticipation of military operations against its population, and deceive the Islamic Republic of Iran, we're talking about the JCPOA there, into surrendering its sovereign right to enrich uranium in the context of its civilian nuclear energy program. And you linked to the Brookings Institute document, Which Path to Persia, there, I think, with the JCPOA link. And that's exactly how it played out, Arnaud. So those 2 points, these institutions like the OPCW and the IAEA, and then the cynical misuse or using UN Security Council resolutions in order to provide cover for, sabotage of the situation to pave the way for war. I mean, on both of those fronts, Arnaud, this is kind of a damning indictment on the countries involved. Go ahead.
Yes, indeed. It's really one step, always doubling down within this paradigmic approach, which basically tends to use those international documents and practices in order to create some kind of yes, cover story, to bring about the exact opposite of what the process itself and the text which out of which those processes come out of, as a yeah, it's very cynical, it's very perverted, one would say. But this is where we are now. So we have, as you said, the use of those agencies using compliant, at least people that could be said to be susceptible to some pressures to provide the right conclusion, or to at least provide conclusions that fall short of going against an agenda that's been pre-established. Let's recall that the US had already been somewhat giving us a foretaste of this when they ignored someone like Scott Ritter, who within the UN's program initiative from 1998 to 2002 had basically done the job, and he testified to that effect in Congress, most famously being shut down or being ridiculed or diminished by Joe Biden. We all remember those footage. They're available on the net. And in 2003, even using the process one more time, or feigning to somehow, I guess they must have realized, they must have been miffed and surprised that the UN was pushing back, and so they decided, well, let's go the extra mile here. Let's assemble, just for a sake of appearance, this unmovic, mission led by Hans Blix, and they just gave him like I think a mere 3 weeks, and there was nothing to be found. How can you, prove a negative, essentially, right? And so after 3 weeks, not unlike what we've seen with the most recent events in Iran, the idea was, we're not going anywhere. We're not even going to give it the chance for a sixth round of talk, as it were. We'll just activate, the use of force. We'll take matters into our own hand. And so, but this has a disastrous effect, because obviously it really looks like you are using the whole process for your own geopolitical agenda, and in so doing, you are inflicting incredible damage on the entire structure. And so, we've seen the same thing also in 2018. Again, bearing on the chemical issue, because first we had Huta, as you mentioned, but then we had the Duma. So the Huta, remember, this is the same year that Russia stepped in and decided to provide an alternative to escalation by negotiating a controlled and comprehensive handing over of the Syrian chemical program.
Which the
Uh,
U.S. military took the
yes,
chemical munitions and destroyed them.
that's
Uh,
right.
that was arranged by John Kerry, if
That's
I
right.
if I recall at the time.
That's right.
So that was taken care of. So East Ghouta in 2013, then you had
Yes.
Khan Shahun in
Yeah.
2017, and then you had
17.
Duma in 2018. So three major chemical weapons, alleged chemical weapons events that
That's
were
right.
precursors to different things. So it looked like a ray of hope there in 2013. I mean, it really
Yes.
it
Should have buried the issue. Yes.
it
Once and for
should
all.
have. It should
Yeah.
have, but you know, they didn't want to let that go, and they
Yeah.
didn't.
That was. I guess that was the only game in town, right? I mean, he had no. I mean, there's often references made to this Israeli bombing of Masyaf Research Center in 2007. But we all know that Syria was a far cry from having a nuclear program.
Yeah.
So the only thing left was the chemical gimmick. But then
Yep.
after 2013, how could you pull that up again? Well, no problem. We'll just have our own proxy there. Somehow use some of those forbidden substance on the civilian population under their control and blame the Syrian government for it.
And
And then
only this week, Donald Trump in a meeting, I think it was just yesterday, where John Ratcliffe, the CIA director, alluded to Russia having chemical
yes,
weapons, and
yes,
and that was televised.
using
So
using it, yeah,
using them, okay, and
using
I
it,
I
yes.
highly doubt it, but I do see evidence of Ukraine doing that, that
Mhm.
we have, and that's documented. So
And that's the
and
right. Within 24 hours after Russia actually announced that,
yep.
that's when the U.S. decided to pull the rug from underneath Russia by occupying the airway with this ludicrous notion that Russia would be using chemical weapons in Ukraine.
So on your article here, and you move on to talk about war crimes, and some of the actions of the Ukrainian military, and we're talking also about the mounting of extremist battalions. Obviously, you haven't used the word Nazi in here, but we know the Azov, the Adar, and all the various extremist, extremist militant wings of the Pravi sector, right sector, and so forth, and they were carrying out documented war crimes. We also have witness testimonies to that effect. It's very well documented on the Russian side. So that's also a big part of this as well, is the kind of normalization by the West of war crimes if its allies are committing them. And we're talking about atrocities here. We're not just talking about, indiscretions, with summary executions, torture. Also, I even saw a picture of a crucifixion early on in the conflict, which is just harrowing, but really nasty stuff. And so that's also an important part of this. So I guess the question, Arnaud, is, bearing in mind this, we're not even talking about Gaza and the IDF and what they have done to the Palestinians, but it seems like if there ever was a need for an international tribunal to adjudicate such war crimes, it's probably now. Like, now is the time when this type of thing needs to happen. Otherwise, we are risking losing the entire international law, international legal framework. It becomes meaningless very, very quickly. Go ahead, Arnaud.
Yes, unfortunately, in this kind of status report of the international legal system, how could we not talk about the failure of international judicial bodies, as it were, to even begin investigation or at least approach any given theater of operation in a neutral way? If we look at the ICC, for instance, and the ICC invested the Ukrainian theater of operation very early on in after the start of military operations there, but with an eye to essentially, go after Russia and its affiliates, essentially. We're in 20, I mean, to be sure, there were problem bearing on up all the way until 2015. Ukraine had signed the ICC Rome Statute in 2000. But it wasn't until 2015, after a couple of declarations, that the jurisdiction was established. And even then, from 2015 to 2022, the ICC essentially looked into communication sent by post-Maidan Kiev, bearing on the alleged systematic use of violence against Maidan protesters by the Yanukovych government. Um, this was quickly the systematic element was somehow not found, and so this was quickly dismissed. But it somehow gave an indication of things to come. And in 2022, following the start of military activities to a new level, at least, the ICC was immediately dispatched to investigate alleged Russian war crimes. So we and going as far as issuing warrants. So the most notorious warrants are those bearing on those alleged fact of child kidnapping, against the president of the Russian Federation and one of its officials, humanitarian ombudswoman. But what we don't know is that Gerasimov and Shoigu are also the object of international arrest warrant by the ICC for their, command and control of bombardment of what is considered non-military targets. But nothing has been opened as far as you alluded to, the people who had the command and control from at least 2014 to 2021 over those battalions, those Nazi battalions. I said extremists because, you have to be careful when you write article like this, because the first thing that's going to be said is that you are, you're a pro-Russian Kremlin mouthpiece. So you have to be extremely cautious with the choice of words. So you have to use alleged because nobody's been tried and found guilty of anything yet. And you have to use more technical term like extremist rather than Nazi, even though documentation is galore in that. Yes, those people actually claim themselves of Nazi ideology. But moving past that caveat here, yes, there was no investigation open into the period from 2014 to 2022, and the intervention of the Russian Federation on those constant systematic shelling of civilians by its own government, and
Yep.
also the exactions committed by some of the most extremist regiments like the Kraken, Idar,
Yep.
Tornado, and because we talk about Azov all the time, but there's many of those battalions. I mean, the head of the Kraken government battalion uh, was essentially eventually arrested and sent to jail because the crimes were so horrendous. This is even before the Russian intervention.
Yep.
We're talking about like 2017, 2018. But then he was released after a mere 2 or 3 years.
Yep.
And from what I understand, his battalion and all of them were reintegrated into the regular Ukrainian armed forces. And today they are basically being used as political commissar. I mean, they are there to enforce, to make sure that those poor souls that are being grabbed and snatched throughout the urban centers in Ukraine stay put on the front line and don't turn back. The moment they show hesitancy or begin to, lay down their weapons, or maybe even try to use a canal, communication channel to somehow, surrender themselves as POWs, they are, exposing themselves to being shot summarily by
That's what the
those
Third
most
Reich
extreme.
did during the Second World
Yes,
War. They had a
definitely.
line a mile or two behind the front line, and they shot people
Mhm.
who were abandoning the front line. So it's just other countries have used that practice in the past. Not something that we expect to see in quote modern warfare, but nonetheless, that's a documented phenomenon in
So
Ukraine. So,
all this to
yep,
say that the ICC again did not look into this, and and did not look into all the war crimes and violations of the laws of wars allegedly committed by Ukraine after 2022. So how believable can the ICC be in that context? When absolutely no warrants whatsoever were even forwarded for consideration to that three-judge panel, bearing on anybody who's part of the Kiev regime, basically.
yep,
So I'm talking about the former Ministry of Interior Avakov, who was from 2014 to 2021 exclusively in charge of those battalions. But not only, I mean, you got a guy like Budanov, the all-powerful intelligence chief, who we know is behind all the terrorist. Yes, there he is, behind all the terrorist attacks on non-military targets, whether it's the Kerch Bridge, for which he actually he has an international arrest warrant on his head for criminal conspiracy. But if we talk about Budanov, and you do well to put the picture, you cannot talk about Budanov without talking about Jack. Also, I should say Jack Al Qaeda is fighting on our side in Syria. Sullivan, you know, who was basically the point man, Washington's point man on those terrorist organizations. I
mm,
understand in your interview with Andre Delkash, the latter actually explicitly alluded to him, paying regular visits to Kiev and specifically visits to Budanov, including a mere few days prior to the Crocus City Hall Center
yep.
massacre.
So coordination,
So
yeah,
it's all there. It's all there, and again, no sense that the ICC is remotely interested in investigating, those individuals. So the ICC somehow, was supposed to be the crystallization of all those ad hoc tribunals, going back going back all the way to the Nuremberg Tribunal. Uh, uh, Basically, is coming up short. I mean, not only is it under criticism for this selective way of prosecuting individuals, heads of states considered by the West to be going against the, I guess, the rule-based order, but also, failing to even investigate anybody, even for the sake of appearances. So what we have here is a political tool operating and somehow validating certain policies by, under color of law, essentially. Those guys can, it's okay. Those guys, no, you cannot touch them. And I would say the ICJ, to a lesser extent, has also shown itself to be, somewhat of and the ICJ is characterized by more of an inertia and inability to, proceed and call things by their name. I mean, we have this injunction bearing on the Israeli military operation in Gaza, only opposed on the bench by, of course, the Israeli representative. Well, that's understandable, but also this Uganda representative, who, as she has come to be known as someone who somehow has a tropism for Zionism, which is okay, I guess, on its face. The problem is that when she goes out on the record and says that the whole process, that there's no evidence whatsoever, and the whole thing is a political process. I mean, you're serving on the court, so you should not make statements like this.
No, it's it really undercuts the legitimacy and the professionalism too. And that's another thing that seems to be going out the window with not just these institutions, but governments as well. Trump being the embodiment of that, of course, but he's not alone. Look at Europe, and we won't get started there. But Arnaud, we're going to have to wrap this program up, shorter than normal discussion, but this is just the beginning of this discussion. I will announce that we're also going to be organizing a panel on this, and I believe you're going to be participating on this. We'll announce when that's coming, and that will be in the coming week or a couple of weeks as soon as we get it organized. But we're going to bring together some experts in this area, and we're going to really try to sketch out this situation, maybe talk about what can be done to ameliorate or to resolve some of these systemic problems before it's too late. Obviously, we want to avoid World War III. That's why we're doing it. But Arnaud Develay, and the article, again, up at 21stcenturywire.com. You must read this. You must share it. It's called "Are We Witnessing the Collapse of International Law?" Arnaud Develay has authored this. It's got a lot of great links in it as well, but this is just the beginning of this conversation, ladies and gentlemen. It's important that you understand that. So there's a lot more to come on this. But Arnaud, I want to thank you for authoring this piece and for joining us today on the Midweek Wire.
Thank you, Patrick. Always a pleasure.
There he goes, ladies and gentlemen. That is Arnaud Develay. He is an international human rights lawyer, political consultant, author, and also a dab hand at geopolitics. We appreciate him joining us on the Midweek Wire. Again, I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen, and if you missed the Sunday Wire, we had a fantastic episode this past weekend, and that's available in the archives at 21stcenturywire.com. So do check that out. Very, very entertaining, but also important episode. We're talking about some very important issues about what's going on in the world, and we'll be back on this weekend. So do keep an eye out for us on that program, as well as daily at 21stcenturywire.com. There's so many important articles up on our website right now. So do take the time to visit us at 21stcenturywire.com. and you'll be better informed for it. So that's all we've got time for today. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on this live stream for the Midweek Wire. We'll see you later on in the week. Take care. All the best.